He stood at the gate in silence, a frail old man in a weathered bomber jacket, clutching a worn-out photo and a folded flag. His eyes, dim yet proud, scanned the Air Force base he once called home. But time had changed things, and so had the rules. The young captain at the security checkpoint barely looked up. "Sorry, sir, you're not cleared to enter." The veteran didn't argue. He simply nodded, as if rejection was something he'd grown used to. But this wasn't just any visit. This was the anniversary of the day he'd lost 5 of his closest brothers-in-arms during a mission that had never made the headlines. And the base chapel held their names, etched in silence. As he turned to walk away, his boots dragging through the dust of memories, a senior officer nearby caught sight of him and froze. Within minutes, the base phone rang. One order echoed across every hallway. "Find that man. Bring him back. That's a hero you just turned away. This isn't just another tale. This is a military tribute to one of our forgotten heroes. A powerful veteran story of sacrifice, silence, and a moment that changed everything." The morning sun crept across the tarmac like a silent salute. Birds circled above the airfield, where once the roar of engines and the thunder of purpose filled the skies. But now, the base was quieter, structured, precise, and ruled by protocol. At the entrance of Falcon Ridge Air Force Base, an old man stood alone. His name was Master Sergeant Harold Benton, a retired veteran of 34 years, who had once flown reconnaissance missions during 2 major wars. Time had bent his back, slowed his steps, and silvered his hair. But the fire in his soul hadn't dimmed. He held a creased envelope and a small bouquet of wildflowers. In his hand, a black and white photo, 6 young men, shoulder to shoulder, laughing in front of an F-4 Phantom. 5 of them had never made it home. Only Harold had survived the fateful operation over foreign skies that went so wrong. It was buried in silence. Today marked the 50th anniversary of that mission. Harold had driven over 300 miles just to kneel at the chapel inside the base, where a quiet memorial plaque bore their names. It was a silent promise he made every year, a tribute not just in words but in presence. But this year was different. As Harold approached the gate, a young captain in a crisp uniform stood alert. His eyes scanned Harold's civilian ID and frowned. "Sir, this is an active base. Visitors need clearance," the captain said politely but firmly. Harold looked down, confused. "I was cleared last year. I've been coming for decades." The captain shook his head. "New command, new protocols. No civilian IDs without prior approval. I'm sorry." Harold opened his mouth to speak, then paused. What could he say that would matter? That he'd bled on that airstrip. That he'd trained cadets right behind the tower. That he'd cradled his dying best friend in the cockpit of a burning jet. None of that was in the system, so he nodded. "Understood, son. No need to argue." He turned slowly, limping back to his car, the photo still clenched in his hand, like a lifeline. Behind him, the captain returned to his post, unaware of the heroic acts and battlefield courage he had just dismissed. But fate has its own way of restoring what protocol erases. Up in the control tower, Colonel Mason Langford, a decorated officer and commander of the base, was walking with his adjutant when he spotted a familiar figure through the binoculars. He froze mid-sentence. "Wait, is that Benton?" The adjutant peered out. "Who?" "Sir Harold Benton, one of the bravest airmen I've ever known." "I haven't seen him in years." The colonel's voice tightened with urgency. "Get me that gate on the radio, now." Minutes later, the gate guard was pale and stunned. The colonel's voice thundered over the comm. "You just turned away a man who gave more to this base than you and I combined. You find him, you bring him back." Orders traveled fast, but Harold had already pulled onto the highway, disappearing among the clouds of dust. Back in his car, the veteran's hands trembled not with anger, but with a quiet ache, the kind only forgotten heroes carry. This section sets the emotional foundation and builds tension while honoring the silent dignity of a real war hero. Colonel Mason Langford wasn't a man who overreacted. He had led missions in Afghanistan, trained elite fighter squadrons, and survived more combat deployments than he could count. But the moment he saw Harold Benton outside that gate, something shifted in him. It wasn't just recognition, it was reverence. The kind of deep, almost sacred respect only a soldier has for another, who walked through fire and returned with silence. Langford walked back into his office and closed the door. Behind him, he sat in stillness, staring at the photograph on his desk, an old, faded picture of a younger him standing beside Benton, back when he was just a second lieutenant. Benton had trained him, mentored him, protected him, and once had saved his life. It was 1975. An operation had gone sideways, deep in hostile airspace. Langford's jet took fire, spiraling into a flat spin. Radio silence. Panic in the air. Benton, flying wingman, broke protocol and followed Langford down, through flak, gunfire, and burning skies. He guided the crippled jet just long enough to give Langford a chance to eject. Then, Benton went back into the fire, searching for others. He came home alone. That wasn't in any report. No medals had been handed out. But Langford never forgot. And now, his unsung hero had been turned away from the very ground he once defended. Lieutenant Myers, Langford called his adjutant. Track Benton down. Use highway patrol, nearby motels, whatever it takes. I want him back before sundown. Myers nodded, understanding this was more than an order. It was a military tribute. A restoration of honor that had momentarily slipped through the cracks of regulation. Meanwhile, Harold had stopped at a small diner, 20 miles out. The flowers lay gently on the passenger seat. He stirred a black coffee in silence, looking through the window at the fading base in the distance. A waitress, probably no older than 22, noticed the flag on his dashboard and walked over. "You military?" she asked kindly. Harold smiled. "Used to be." "What branch?" "Air Force." She beamed. "My brother's at Lockland right now, doing basic. He wants to be a pilot." Harold's face lit up. "Tell him to hold on tight. The sky teaches more than any classroom ever will." The girl smiled and walked off. Harold looked down at the photo again. The faces stared back. Young, full of life, frozen just days before they vanished. He whispered, "I didn't forget. Boys, even if they did." Back at Falcon Ridge, an alert had been sent out. Langford made it personal. Every officer was briefed. The base chapel was readied. An honor guard was quietly assembled. It was no longer about formality. It was about redemption, sir, Myers called, rushing back into the colonel's office. "We found him. He's at a diner just outside Crescent Hill." Langford grabbed his coat. "I'll go myself." The diner bell rang as Langford entered. He was still in uniform, stars on his shoulders, medals on his chest. Everyone turned to look, but Harold didn't. He sipped his coffee, lost in memory. Langford walked up and sat across from him without a word. Silence hung between two generations of warriors. Finally, Harold looked up. Recognition flickered across his eyes. "Mason." Langford nodded, his voice tight. "I'm sorry, Harold. That should have never happened." Harold shrugged, calm, as always. "Rules change, I understand." "No," Langford said firmly. "There are rules. And then there's honor. And we failed you today." Harold looked out the window. "I just wanted to see their names. One more time." Langford stood. "Then let's go. The chapel is waiting, and so is the base. For you." They arrived with full escort, to Humvees, an honor guard, and every soldier on gate duty standing at attention. As Harold stepped out, the same captain who had turned him away earlier saluted sharply. "Welcome home, Master Sergeant." Harold didn't scold him. He simply nodded, with the grace of a man who had seen too much to hold grudges. He walked slowly toward the chapel, the sun casting long shadows across the tarmac. Inside, candles flickered beneath the memorial plaque. Langford stood beside him, as Harold gently placed the flowers beneath the names, each one etched with pain, pride, and permanence. He knelt, placing the photo on the ground, and for a long, reverent moment, no one spoke, because this wasn't just a ceremony, it was a sacred act of remembrance. This chapter paints the emotional turning point, the colonel's awakening, the mission to restore honor, and the moment the base remembered what it had forgotten. It's where emotional storytelling meets inspirational military truth. Inside the small, stone chapel of Falcon Ridge Air Force Base, silence reigned. No rank mattered here. No orders echoed. Only names carved into a bronze plaque, warmed by flickering candlelight, stood as eternal reminders of lives given, freely, without expectation of glory. Harold Benton stood before the memorial like a man returning to sacred ground. His hand trembled slightly as he traced the names. Lt. Joseph Harris, SGT Miguel Ramirez, Capt. Walter Price, CPL, David Lynn, Madge, Frank Easton, his brothers, his crew, his family. The room behind him had filled quietly. Officers, airmen, base, staff, even a few civilians, all had gathered, alerted by whispers spreading across Falcon Ridge. Something extraordinary was happening. A real war hero had returned, and this was their chance to witness history breathe once more. Harold knelt, slowly, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. In his hands, he held the old photograph again. 6 young men, alive, smiling. A snapshot of before. He set it down beneath the plaque, then opened the envelope he had brought. Inside was a handwritten letter, one he had rewritten every year, for 49 years, addressed to his fallen comrades. As he read aloud, his voice wavered but never broke. I'm back, boys. 50 years today. I can still hear your laughter. I can still feel the sky rumble around us. I've lived long, longer than I ever expected. Married, raised a daughter. I've told the world about you, but most weren't listening. That's okay. I was. I still am. You never got your parade, but I've walked one every day, just carrying your memories. His voice caught. A few soldiers behind him wiped their eyes discreetly. This wasn't a eulogy. It was a soldier's promise fulfilled. Colonel Langford stepped forward slowly, a small, ceremonial case in his hands. He waited until Harold rose, then opened it. Inside was a silver star, bent slightly at one edge. Weathered. Real. After that mission, Langford began, there were no reports filed. The politics were complicated. They always are. But I had this medal commissioned. Not through the system. Just from me. I never had the chance to give it to you. Harold stared at the star, his expression unreadable. I don't need a medal, he said quietly. Langford nodded. I know. That's why you deserve it. The colonel pinned it to Harold's chest, just above his heart. A respectful hush fell over the room. It wasn't about ceremony. It was about acknowledgement. Something deeper than recognition. Something sacred. Afterward, as the room began to empty, a young airman named Private Jenkins hesitated near the back. He was only 19. Fresh out of tech school. Everything about Harold's presence had shaken something loose in him. Something more human than any briefing or training module. He approached nervous. Sir, I just wanted to say, thank you, for what you did, for what you're doing. Harold turned to him, kindly. It's not just about what we did back then, son. It's about what you all carry forward now. Every salute, every watch, every silent moment. You're the new guardians of the legacy. Don't forget the ones who didn't make it home. They'd want you to live fully. The young soldier nodded, swallowing hard. That moment, a quiet bridge between generations, was as important as any battle fought. Outside the chapel, the sun had begun to set. It bathed the base in gold, turning concrete into something almost holy. Before Harold left, Langford asked, why did you keep coming back all these years, even when no one remembered? Harold smiled, the kind of smile that held both pain and pride, because remembering is the only way they stay alive. When I speak their names, when I stand here, it's not for me, it's for them. They're the real heroes. I'm just the echo. Langford nodded, his throat tight. You've done more for this base today than most men do in a career. Harold looked around one last time, eyes misting. I think, this may be my last visit, he said. I don't know if I'll be strong enough next year. Langford straightened. Then next year, we'll come to you. As Harold was escorted back to the gate, the entire base stood at attention. Pilots saluted. Mechanics paused their work. Even the tower went quiet. Not for a general, not for a politician, but for a forgotten airman who had once soared above them all. And as he left the base, the young captain, the same one who had denied him entry, stood by the gate once more. This time, not as a guard, but as a witness. He stepped forward, holding out a freshly issued permanent base pass. For whenever you want to come home, he said. Harold took it gently, eyes locked with his. Thank you, son. Just remember, home isn't the gate you walk through. It's the people who remember why you came. This section bridges emotion and meaning, showing how even one act of emotional storytelling can ripple across generations. It honors the soldier's sacrifice, pays tribute to inspirational military moments, and celebrates the memory of unsung heroes in a way only sincere human connection can. Weeks passed after Harold Benton's return to Falcon Ridge Air Force Base, but the ripple he left behind refused to fade. Something had changed. Conversations among the younger airmen shifted. Stories once buried in dusty archives were suddenly being shared in break rooms and barracks. A quiet initiative began to take form, not from command, but from the ranks themselves. It started with one simple question. Who else have we forgotten? Private Jenkins, the same young airman who had thanked Harold at the chapel, led the effort. Alongside a few others, he began collecting names, veterans who had once served at Falcon Ridge but had been lost to time. Some had died in combat. Others had retired quietly, their service buried beneath years of silence. With Colonel Langford's blessing, they formed the Legacy Wall, a digital archive and on-base memorial that honored every soldier, mechanic, pilot, nurse, and technician who had served there since its founding. And at the top of the list, the 6 men Harold had remembered for 50 years. Benton's photo, now framed, hung above the digital panel. Not for decoration, but as a reminder. Harold never asked for any of it. He returned home quietly, just as he had done every year. His daughter, now a nurse in her late 40s, noticed a difference in him. "You're smiling more," she said one morning over breakfast. Harold nodded. "It's the first time in years I feel like they were heard, like someone finally saw them again." She smiled back. "You gave them that." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Some things are beyond words. A month later, Falcon Ridge received news that sent a collective ache through its holes. Master Sergeant Harold Benton had passed away peacefully in his sleep. His daughter found the flag still folded on his nightstand, the silver star beside it, and the final letter he had written, addressed once again to his fallen brothers. But this time, a second envelope was left behind too, marked simply, "To Falcon Ridge." Inside was a short note. "Thank you for remembering. Not for me, for them. If you keep telling their stories, they'll never be gone, and neither will I." Harold the base held a memorial ceremony the following week. Every rank attended. Colonel Langford stood at the front, holding back emotion as a bugler played taps. 6 folded flags were placed on the altar, one for each of Harold's brothers. A 7th was laid for him. But that wasn't all. For the first time in base history, Falcon Ridge opened its gates for a public Veterans Stories Day, inspired directly by Harold's visit. Civilians, former service members, and families were invited to share stories. Letters, photos, anything that brought to light the lives that uniform had once embraced. It wasn't a parade. It was something more sacred. A military tribute born from one man's quiet persistence. At the event, a retired colonel from another base approached Langford. "What made you do all this?" he asked. "The ceremony, the wall, the day." Langford smiled, looking at Harold's photo. "A man came to our gate and reminded us of who we were, not by raising his voice, but by never letting go of a promise." The colonel nodded. "He sounds like the kind of hero we never read about." Langford turned toward the Legacy Wall, where names continued to be added by the hour. "That's exactly what he was," he said. "A forgotten hero, until we remembered." Back at the chapel, young Private Jenkins knelt before the plaque, just as Harold had done. He placed a single wildflower beneath the photo, then stood silently, offering a salute that didn't just reach the frame, but the heavens beyond. For a moment, the wind stirred through the open doors, rustling the flags ever so gently. And if you stood still enough, you might swear you heard 6 voices laugh in the breeze. Because Harold Benton was right. As long as we remember their names, they're never truly gone.